To welcome Joaquín Alvarado. He is the founding director of San Francisco State's Institute for Next Generation Internet. He has earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Chicano Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Master's of Fine Arts from the UCLA School of Film, Television, and Digital Media. He is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, writer, producer, and director. And as a media educator, his work with students began in the 1980s when he developed the first television program in the nation to be produced by Hispanic youth. Currently, he's a founding member of San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom's Digital Media Advisory Council, and he's here to talk to us without slides, just talk and discussion. So this, please make this very interactive about the National Public Lightpath, policy and technology platform for meeting the connectivity challenge in the U.S. So let's give him a nice big round of applause. Welcome, Joaquín.
Thank you. So this is on. It sounds loud. I am deeply grateful to the opportunity here for that CITRIS inviting me. How many people actually work for CITRIS or are associated with CITRIS in the room? Wow. Okay, this is good. CITRIS is the right kind of diversity, I think, for looking at problems in different ways. There's a lot of great stuff happening here. I have made a conscious decision in my life to no longer kill people with PowerPoint slides. So I hope you're okay with that. I'm totally willing to dumb this down and put it into bullet points. If you want that later, I can give that to you. But I'd like to really have a conversation, if that's possible. There are a couple of main themes I'm going to talk about here. One is the Internet, in its biggest, most wide cloud version, has transformed everything in its wake at a moment in time when the world is undergoing massive transformations itself, and the challenges that we're confronting are perhaps greater than they've ever been. So there seems to be a nice synchronicity about technology being a way to address the new kinds of problems that every generation must face, and I think we're in one of those moments. So that's one. Two is, how many people work for public universities or the public system in this room? Okay, so I'm going to talk about the collapse of American public infrastructure. I'm going to talk about the changing dynamic of persistent human interaction with computing environments. I'm going to talk very nuts and bolts about what I think we should do in this country. So let's start at the beginning. The United States, and it's possible that our last great contribution to the world was our participation in creating the Internet. In these universities and universities across this country, major innovations around how people interact with the network are a result of public funding of research in universities like UC Berkeley. And it came out of lots of different parts of the woodwork, right? I mean, University of Illinois Champaign and Mosaic and NSFNet. I mean, this stuff has happened at universities all across this country, not just the ones you hear about all the time. We should take a lot of pride as Americans in that contribution. Now, when the Internet was commercialized, there was no real public conversation about what that meant. So for most Americans who had not been using it on the university campuses or weren't in the business space thinking about handling massive data sets, it arrived in the form of a CD-ROM with AOL stamped on it. It was a casual introduction. And AOL, anyone know the real history of AOL? It had been around for years before it sent my mom that CD-ROM saying, here's the Internet. And then people just started going to it, and slowly companies figured out, oh, I got to be on the Internet, and then people started to write applications, and then Flash happened, and then social networking happening, and then casual gaming. All these things have happened. But that initial process of really thinking about what the impact was going to be is something that we've been doing in reverse in this country in many ways. And that's whether you're looking at digital divide issues, whether you're looking at security protocols, whether you're looking at distributed file sharing. We've always been surprised by the latest innovation, and then we start having a public conversation about it. In the media space, piracy is a huge issue for the state of California. We know that students on our campuses are using our super high-speed networks to exchange files. And we know that not all of those files are rights cleared. So we have choices to make as a society, and we're figuring out how to have those conversations. Do we want to say no to innovative ways of distributing lots of data over the network fast in ways that lots of people can adopt without needing to be trained on it? That seems like a good idea. Do we want to undercut what is one of the key industries of the state of California, which is the entertainment industry, by not allowing them a rights environment where they can recoup some of their money? These are big issues. Do we want Google, a very important California corporation employing lots of people, a leader globally in the space? Do we want them to cannibalize Viacom and Viacom to cannibalize Google because they can't figure out how to deal with content on YouTube? I mean, we have big choices to make as a society. Net neutrality, right? Well, we know that Google ain't going to pay for 700 megahertz. Anyone following that? Right? So there was an auction for what will be, the bandwidth space left behind by television in America going over to digital television signals, right? And in that space, there was the possibility of requiring a more open engineering architecture for the network, which would have produced greater bandwidth on that network. The FCC chose to keep it narrowcasted in large part, and then did an auction for it. So Google said, keep it open, keep it as open as possible. We will bid on it. We will come in at the minimum bid, $4.6 billion. And they did, but they got outbid by the incumbent telco carriers. So over 700 megahertz, you're going to get about 10 to 15 megabits of speed. And that's going to be the new internet that the telephone companies and the wireless companies will sell you. And that's just what was left behind by what is a publicly owned resource, the airwaves, right? But these are complicated issues in a country as big as the United States is. I mean, how many people have been across this whole country in a car? You took the 40 or the 10 or the 80? You took the 80. It's big, right? I mean, this country is big. It's huge. How many people have taken the 40 all the way across it? All right, the 40 at most points is 1,000 miles from the 80, right? If you've taken the 10 for any length of time, this is a really ridiculously large place. If you're we have the delegation from the Netherlands, you can leave the country in a few hours. You can't even leave this state in a few hours. And there were some principles that were established early on around communications that reflected American values very well. Anyone from rural California here? Everyone's from the big city? Anyone grow up in the country? Wow, where'd you grow up? Rural Oklahoma. Did you have a phone? Did the phone work? This is very important. This is the idea of universal access, right? Early on in the phone game, Congress recognized that some districts weren't on the map, right? How many people in the town you grew up in?
10,000. We were actually 9 miles out.
All right, 9 miles out of town. Well, in 1930, you were probably roughly the same size or maybe smaller? Okay. My grandmother lives in Oroville, California, which is about an hour and a half into the Sierras from Sacramento. She picks up the phone. There's a dial tone. She lives in a community out in the woods. I mean, this is like the suburbs of Oroville, with about 10 other old people, and every one of their phones work, right? How do we get there, right? The U.S. government decided, okay, we can trade some monopoly kinds of apparatus if you put a phone to rural America, right? Same thing with electricity. There had to be a deal cut to incentivize and basically enforce that electricity had to make it everywhere in this country, not just some places. If you look at public education, right? There was a debate that raged in this country. Anyone a teacher in this room? A teacher, very good. There was a debate. What do you teach? Chemistry. Here at Berkeley? Okay. There was a debate as to whether or not every American needed education, right? And how much education they needed. And do you need one schoolhouse, one room, all students? Should it be different? Should there be a high school? Should there be a middle school? These were debates about access that happened in this country to deal with the fact that we talked about ourselves as a democracy. We talked about ourselves from the time of the Constitution as being rural and being urban, and we've been constantly negotiating that dynamic ever since, right? So why is it that our internet today is some of the worst in the industrialized world? It's bad. How many people have 10 megabits at home? Well, not people from the Netherlands. That was rude. That was me. How many people who live in the United States have 10 megabits at home? Okay, how many people have 5 megabits? 3? I have 3. I pay about $60 for it. This sucks, right? This is bad. How many people were on YouTube today? Went to YouTube today? How many people went to YouTube? All right. Went to YouTube, right? It's estimated, and these are hard things to track. Actually, there's people at CITRIS working on this, these kinds of issues. How do you track the network traffic? It is estimated that roughly 10% of the network traffic on the internet is YouTube. And YouTube is the world's most expensive, least profitable public media platform of all time. Makes 0 for Google. Draws a lot of eyeballs. And apparently, I don't know what we did before YouTube, but something was out there. People were dying for the opportunity to share everything. Everything. Yes, it is. YouTube is the best place to find funny videos of your mom running over the cat. It is also the best place for Spanish-speaking teenagers to find contextually relevant information on sexually transmitted diseases. It is also the #1 place for independent public broadcasting producers to distribute content and attract viewership to the traditional station. It is also the #1 site on the planet for piracy. So I'm a fan of The Jam. Everyone is the band The Jam. I can go watch any video I've ever wanted, they ever made on YouTube right now. Try doing that before YouTube. So again, there was something waiting to happen, and it happened. And people voted with their clicks. But it has literally pushed the internet, and I'm talking about at the data center in this country, to the brink. About a year ago, 365 Main, which was a big colo data center in San Francisco, shut down. Do people remember this? It was off for the day because they had a power surge, ran out of juice. And so Craigslist, Second Life, right? Huge social networking sites down for the day. And the problem was PG&E couldn't deliver more power into that building safely, right? So, okay, so then a bunch of those companies went to Texas with their data centers and stuck it on the old broadcast.com infrastructure, which is now like a wholesale data center type place. So it was distributing out that way. Now there's a whole range of companies who are on the verge of pushing their data centers offshore, right? There are many countries globally that are playing the data center game and want to provide low-cost data hosting on fiber, right, so that companies can get a cheaper and more redundant, more secure location for that. But again, huge policy issues, right? If your data lives on servers in a country that has laws different than the United States, whose laws govern those machines? It's not the United States, right? Now, we also have a government, a federal government, which has intelligently, in some cases, stayed hands-off in terms of regulating the internet, right? There was a big push to regulate it around pornography, which Congress resisted, right? That could have been a way that the internet was censored 6 or 7 years ago because of the preponderance of it and the almost inexplicable way that you could possibly secure viewership of pornography and make it 18 or older. That's almost an impossible task in today's internet. So there have been ways where the United States federal government has stayed hands-off and allowed things to flourish and at least talked about principles of net neutrality. But there's also been other ways where they have not chosen to act where they could or should have. So are folks followed the Yahoo case with the dissident blogger in China? Anyone know about this? A few people? Somebody posted a message on a blog on a Yahoo site in China. And the Chinese federal government pursued that person. And they went to Yahoo and said, give him up. And Yahoo was bound by the laws of China in this case. they would have been in violation of the law that they were governed by in their Chinese subsidiary. So they gave up the information. That person was subsequently jailed, is in jail right now. And Yahoo corporate in Sunnyvale is tremendously embarrassed and mortified over this, right? Because people assume when you go on blog or you do your email, it's not being watched. This is free space, right? But everyone's heard of the NSA, right? The courts have said it's not necessarily free space, right? And the federal government has said, we don't really have a policy about this. So Congress brought Jerry Yang to testify about, why did you turn this guy in? And sitting behind him was the mother of the person in jail. And it was a big lashing. Jerry Yang had to eat crow in front of Congress and promised that it was a mistake. They didn't know what to do. They weren't sure. And Congress got to wrap their knuckles over it. And the mom is suing Yahoo in a U.S. court over this. Well, why are we leaving it up to companies to deal with what is an issue of international law, right? And particularly if you look at companies who do great work here, but Cisco benefits as much from the firewall around China as anybody else on the planet does. It's big business in many cases, right? So how do we create federal policy that gives clear guidelines to companies, right? When's the last time anyone smoked cigars in this room? Oh, well, if you're from the Netherlands, can you buy a Cuban cigar? Yeah, we can, right? Here is a small country. Now, mind you, closer to home, hundreds of millions of dollars in cocaine, which is also illegal, manages to find its way to the United States. Try finding a Cuban cigar in less than a week. So if we can have federal policy for those issues, right, then very large issues around freedom of speech, human rights, information, corporate policies, how these things happen on an international stage, we absolutely have no game plan for. And what's evolved here, and this is where I'll be provocative, if you are a phone company or a cable company, there is no clear path for your business right now, right? If you ask the phone companies what they are, ask the president of AT&T in California. He will say, and I've heard him say publicly, we're a wireless and an entertainment company, right? We have commodity networks, and that's a legacy revenue stream for us, but we're evolving into this new space. And so they spend a lot of time and energy going to Sacramento, and they've done this in a number of states, to get the ability to do what's known as statewide franchising for video services, right? Now, before, when the cable company came to Berkeley, it had to negotiate with the city of Berkeley over franchise rights to be the provider in that community, right? And the cities got to shake down the cable companies and get networking for free, get access to the pipes, get a television station. You know, when you watched your city council on television, that's because some cable company had to cough up some money to support that in exchange for having rights to that market, right? Well, the phone company said, this is different. We're IPTV. We're going to run over the network, and it's our network. And the network's already there. We're going to upgrade the network, and we need to upgrade the network in this country. We're going to spend billions to upgrade it, but we can't go city to city and negotiate with everybody. We want one statewide franchise to serve the whole state of California. This exists here. And it's meant to incentivize the phone companies to come in and create competition with the cable companies, right? Well, what are they selling? They're selling television. Right? This isn't an interactive data stream of all kinds of collaborative, real-time persistent social networking gaming spaces. It's TV, right? And the last time I checked, we had plenty of TV. TV is suffocating. TV is dying on the vine. And here comes one of the big institutional corporate folks in this country who have a responsibility, a right, and a market around networking. And they're getting into a game which is literally 20 years too late. Right? The cable companies, where are they going? They're writing data over their networks, and they're selling you cable modems. Who has a cable modem versus DSL? So cable modem people in the United States, you can pay up, and in most big markets now, you can get 10-ish megabits. Right? You're going to pay about $80 to $120 a month to get that. Right? And the upper limits of cable, if DOCSIS, is anyone following DOCSIS? DOCSIS is a new technology to expand the data capabilities of traditional coaxial cable. And it's thought it can go up to 100 megabits, right? So they think they can push it to 100 megabits. So they think that they've got 10 to 20 years in the United States before they would max out the market at just upselling people to that 100 megabits, right? Now, that seems like a lot, right? My email is not 100 megabits. If I watch an MPEG-4 HD stream, that's about 6 megabits, right? If I'm YouTubing as a I can do a lot with 100 megabits, a lot. Well, what can't I do? Ravi Namana, who works here at CITRIS, is partnering, and there's an MRI project here, right? What is it called? It's the lightweight MRI. Portable MRI that comes in at $45,000 versus $750,000 for MRI, the big ones. This is a more lightweight one, and it's actually more effective at finding early signs of certain kidney diseases. It's actually a better technology in some cases, right? But it must ride on the network. The data has to come off of it and go to the network, right? I asked Ravi, what kind of network does that device need? 100 megabits for that one device. So I hate to say it, but the United States is old. We are an old country. We have a longevity revolution happening at a time when our public system is crumbling, right? So we're going to have many, many people, my parents included, living long retirements with a crumbling medical system, a crumbling everything system. So the ability of technology to solve not all those problems, but some of those problems is going to be severely limited if we can't find lighter weight, lower cost technologies to address medical issues that will be increasingly network dependent, right? And here's one developed: public universities, innovation, lower costs. In rural California, it's expensive and prohibitively expensive to put MRI machines. But for $45,000, they can have one. But they don't have the network to actually run the thing on top of, right? That's one instance. What's another instance? Well, imagine, and this is, who's been to Japan lately? Where were you? What were you doing? Visiting your cousin? Were they? What kind of network do they subscribe to?
It's just the regular NTT service. It's like a DSL type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we stole neighbor's wireless most of the time anyway.
Okay. That is illegal, but this is not being webcast, right? That part gets edited. I was walking down Akasaka, or one of the electric, like, woo, big parts, like Tokyo, like what you see in your mind when you think Tokyo is the future city. And there was a little sign from like street vendor, not street vendor, small independent like reseller of networks and mobile devices, whatever. There was a frowny face and what turned out to be about $20 American, and it said 100 megabit. And then there was a smiley face guy, and it said gigabit, $50, right? And so I went in, and my interpreter, yes, right? Certain buildings, certain parts of Tokyo, this was 4 years ago. You could buy gigabit for the price less than what I'm paying right now. So there's been some uptake. There's been slower in the younger communities, actually. So NTT has done interesting new brandings around why you need this kind of speed and capacity. So they partnered with Nintendo. And they said, imagine playing the Wii on a gigabit network, right? Blow your mind in terms of what's possible. Now, how many people in this country, does anyone know how many people pay for monthly fees to be a part of multiplayer games, massive multiplayer online games? 24 to 30 million people pay monthly, which is about 2.5 times the number of people paying their membership to public broadcasting, right? So now what does a gaming environment give you? It gives you HD quality video. It gives you supercomputer graphics rendering. It gives you persistent communication, right? My brother-in-law plays Tiger Woods golf with a guy in New Zealand. They're on voice communication while they're doing it, right? It gives you all of these multimedia assets, right? It is a supercomputing platform, and it's $200, right? So in Japan, early adoption doesn't just look like, do business stuff or do e-health, which is also a major funded initiative there. It's also do your social life and your gaming and your entertainment over these networks. So you've got cable companies playing the data game, and you've got phone companies playing the media game. And neither one of them, to be quite honest, has the capital. They just don't have enough money to cover this whole country. There is no way they can do it. If you look at Verizon, which is actually funding fiber into the mid-Atlantic with Fios, right? That is an expensive proposition. And they're picking up only certain counties where the income levels are high enough, and they're not even offering full throughput on that fiber. They're selling a 30 megabit service. 6 to 10 megabits is for information, data, and the other is for television, right? So the rest of it is throttled down, totally throttled down. So we're in deep doo-doo as a country. Because if you look at all of the industries that we feel are the future industries, and CITRIS represents a number of them, every country in the world, every region in the world is trying to eat our lunch. And it's around these industries. Biotech, right? I mean, you can confirm this in the Netherlands. Biotech, ICT, digital media, right? Emergent platforms, core engineering research, right? We have an engineering shortage here that is frightening, right? All of those industries are computationally intensive industries, and computational sciences are pushing things towards the network. And the capacity of these networks has expanded at a faster rate, which has been strange, than the capacity of the backplane for the last 8 or 9 years. So not CITRIS, but Cal IT2 down in San Diego, which is a sister center here, has been focusing on, I mean, they're running hundreds and hundreds of separate data channels over one piece of fiber right now. So this ability to scale fiber, individual strands of fiber, by using better electronics, which continue to get cheaper and cheaper, is really transformative. So we need this kind of infrastructure if we're going to stay competitive and successful in a lot of the industries that we lay claim to in this region, in this state, in this country. And more importantly, if we're going to enable an ever more complicated social space to thrive and to stay unified and to represent values which have produced very good outcomes in the past, then we need to rethink about how we're assuming and or assigning responsibilities for the network that we have in this country. Because we can't expect AT&T or Comcast, who hire lots of people in our state. Should they go away, where do those jobs go? You know, we don't have companies to fill in. We don't want them to fail. But they don't have the money to put it everywhere, and that's the basic problem. So what has happened is a lot of local governments have started pursuing their own initiatives around connectivity. You have seen people talk about wireless as a potential solution for last mile issues. Some states, the state of Vermont has initiated $40 million in bond funding to build their own high-speed network because they're totally off the grid. They don't have the concentration of people to make it economically viable for any incumbent to come spend money on their network, right? So we wouldn't wait around for a private company to see the value in improving our levy system in this state, although maybe that's what we're doing. I don't know what the plan is anymore. That wouldn't be a public policy decision that would make any sense to anyone, right? And some states, frustrated by years of no investment, have started to move in their own direction. Some communities have started to move in their own direction. And they have targeted really being able to engage people in meaningful ways so they understand the value of these things. OK, so here's what we're trying to do. One great thing happened about 45 years ago in this country. Lots of smart people, Congress, educators, media producers got together and they decided that television was a really important medium. And a lot of American society was going to be negotiated through television. And there should be a public interest in the creation of television across the country. And what was known as the Carnegie Commission for Public Television said, after a year and a half of investigation, we need something that should be called public broadcasting in the United States of America. And it should be focused on the public interest. It should be educational. It should be high-quality content. It should be non-commercial. And not only should we have this, Congress should fund it. And they should fund it in such a way that it has its own objectivity and is not under the political whims of who happens to be in Congress. And that happened. We did that. Congress created this Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and public broadcasting, PBS, got created out of what was a loosely organized group of independent television stations in the 50s. that the Ford Foundation was supporting, known as the National Educational Television Network, and created PBS. And it set aside certain parts of the spectrum, right, which was a public asset that they were selling for $1. Here, $1 NBC, right, to buy television bandwidth. That should be set aside for the public interest. So there is a precedent for communications technology that is going to be important to our country having a set aside for the public interest, right? Now, if you are from any part of this country, you are within range of a public television affiliate. There are no markets in the United States that are not covered by PBS. In Oklahoma, what was your station? You didn't? There was no TV in Oklahoma? Okay. But you've seen TV? Okay. If you go to Alaska, there's PBS. If you go to rural North Dakota, there is PBS. PBS is literally everywhere that people live in this country. What else is everywhere where people live in this country? Universities and schools, right? Local governments, regional governments, highways, right? Eisenhower had to convince Congress to pour a certain grade of concrete and make the lanes a certain width for the interstate highway system. Why? So that tanks could run on it. Now, did he really think tanks would be running all over the United States? No, he didn't. But it was a good sales pitch, right? And it meant more jobs, more time to build it. It was one of the biggest public works ever in the history of the United States, right? Which was sold on the basis of not interstate commerce, but homeland security, basically, is what wasn't called that back then. It was national defense. But now we have a homeland. I hope everyone's comfortable with that. So let's imagine, what if we took those PBS affiliates, which serve local communities, do local programming, but also have a national distribution channel where they bring in high-quality content, right? Now, there's a gap, yes. You stop watching at Sesame Street and you don't come back until the Jackson Browne reunion, right? So it's missing everybody who's between the age of 9 and 40, missing from public broadcasting. That's a problem. That also happens to be the population missing from this democracy, although 9-year-olds don't know that they're in it. So let's imagine that's an asset over here. Now take the public universities and the private universities. Does everyone know what Scenic is, or Internet 2, or National Lambda Rail? Okay, when the first Internet got commercialized, the universities stood around and said, oh, this was ours, and now I'm going to pay you for it, and I'm going to be competing with the gap? No, that doesn't work. They got together in 30 universities first in '96, had a meeting at the airport in Chicago. So let's build another Internet. And let's start from scratch. What should it look like? Well, it should support media content, which the first Internet was not designed to push video. It was not designed to push video, period. Right? Everything that is supporting video on the Internet right now is a Band-Aid that is the result of the fact that it wasn't made to do that. Right? But turn video off, and people will think the Internet is broken. Right? So they said, should support high-quality media content and high throughput media content. Compression sucks. Right? 90% of the Internet is also dealing with having to make stuff smaller. Right? So let's just imagine a greenfield space where things don't have to get smaller. Right? Let's also imagine that scientists are going to want to collaborate in synchronous ways. So let's make that a possibility. And let's also create a more dynamic way of allocating network resources. So just as that was happening, the network, and I'm a filmmaker, so bear with. If I screw this up, you can correct me. But the network was evolving to a space where it could really start to subdivide the fiber and create dedicated channels. And so then researchers could start to grab a piece of light spectrum on the network for a certain amount of time and get 1 to 10 gigabits on it, right? So then coming behind it were the media makers, which is where I came into the space, right? Filmmakers, production companies, anybody in the creative industries has a major problem, and that's they're working with a client base that's global. So every time you need to do a review and approve, this is a very simple problem that costs millions and billions of dollars. Every time you have to do review and approve globally, or even LA to New York, you lose a day, right? And it's not a collaboration space. It's an email that says, does this work? And then you look at it, you're like, what do you mean? Oh, well, I meant this. Get on the phone. Yeah, look at that. Okay. It's not a real-time persistent environment for collaboration. And that was in the guts of the thinking around these next generation of networks. And the state of California has one, which is operated as a nonprofit that the universities have invested in called Scenic. And it serves the network needs of education. And that serves this campus. It serves my campus. And unique to California, although this is changing, it also serves K-12. So we literally have a production 10 gigabit backbone environment that anybody who's on this campus can tap into and connect to anybody else, not just nationally, but there's an international alliance called the GLIF, which is the Global Lambda Integrated Facility. And it is the network of these networks with handshake agreements so that from us to the Netherlands, we can pass 10 gigabits with about 10 minutes worth of negotiation on the network. And then we can leave that on for any amount of time. So what we've done in the media space is taken HD and above content. There's another layer called 4K. And we've started to distribute that in a workflow environment across the network in an uncompressed fashion. And we're finding really funny problems, like the hardware doesn't know that there's no delay. It doesn't understand that. So where you would normally have to buffer stuff and deal with delays in an editing suite, this thing is moving faster than it would move in a local environment, in a traditional production environment. So we're getting all kinds of cool, funny, nutty problems. So imagine PBS, imagine the national footprint of universities, and the job of universities is to fulfill the promise of America. And I'm not kidding when I say that, right? Publicly funded education is supposed to provide this democracy with smart people, right? We need those smart people desperately, especially if they're young. They need to get smart because we're going to keep chugging for 50 years. We can't all eat at Coco's on the discount every day, right? We need a thriving economy with smart people engaged in this democracy. So imagine those universities as nodes where they have the network and they have the young people and they have the researchers and they have the staff and they have the community, right? And if you put those two pieces together and then you connect to local governments and state governments and Congress in a way that suggests we can create a public interest layer that is a next generation network that supports education, research, collaboration, and public interest media, right? Then you would essentially have the starting footprint of the next internet in this country. Because you would put the kinds of guts into the major markets first and then rural America where it's really hard for the incumbents, that they could come in and then spend not as much as it would take in that community, but they can supplement that, they can come on top of that and run services over those networks in ways that can return on the bonds that local communities are going to have to run to build these networks, but also provides the services that the local governments don't want to provide, or the state governments, or the feds. You don't want Berkeley cable television. You don't want that. Any basketball fans? Whoa. Soccer fans? All right, maybe a little better. Believe me, you don't want the city of Amsterdam to be responsible for your local team's coverage. You want people who make money doing certain parts of this work. So to encourage that investment and make it possible faster, this is also meant to design that. So that's the essential architecture of the National Public Lightpath Initiative. We are partnered with PBS, we are partnered with universities in these networks, and we're partnered with governments, and we're working on Congress because we feel that for a few $100 million a year over a few years, we can start to establish this kind of baseline that changes the way investment is happening and changes in the minds of Americans what we should be expecting out of the next internet, which should be much faster, much more secure, much more collaborative, and enable creativity and exchange in ways that this one was never designed or able to do fully. So I'll open it up to questions there.
Up to the questions here. I actually have a couple questions from Santa Cruz. They first say, could you please speak about how Google, et cetera, are moving data centers to areas that have recently lost high energy manufacturing, like Tennessee?
It's very interesting, actually. I mean, we need places to put this, and a greenfield is oftentimes easier than an urban area or traditional places. So where they can go into communities and get incentives, as is the case of Google, then it's much cheaper to build there, and they can put their own fiber to that data center. And in the case of Google, responsibly try to reduce the carbon footprint of those data centers. I mean, that's the other problem. The Earth is heating up. Have you guys all heard of climate change? Very bad, very bad. All of these industries I just quoted as being critical to our future economic vitality are also the exact industries that are going to suck more energy and accelerate climate change. So companies able to really build in a space where they can do the solar and reduce the footprint is really important. And a lot of states are catching on to that and trying to attract American companies into them. I think the dystopic version my academic hat on is they still can't do it for even close to the cost that other countries can.
One more from Santa Cruz right here. It says, how do you think WiMAX will help spread 4K?
WiMAX isn't fast enough. WiMAX is, you're lucky, I think once it's production and once the devices are built, nobody's going to sell you more than 10 or 15 megabits on WiMAX. Because the same people who are going to sell you WiMAX have just spent billions of dollars on 700 megahertz. And they're going to want to cap, the next internet will be mobile 10 megabits. That's what they're going to try to sell you. And for uncompressed 4K, you need 6 gigabits of throughput. So that's a really particular question, but you can get HD over 10 megabits in MPEG-4 format. So you'll see HD mobile television soon. There's a lot of people talking about that, but you won't get the kind of richness or anything above that.
Do you have any questions from the floor here? I'm just going to run the microphone around.
So I'm wondering what are concrete examples of what might show up on this public internet. For example, PBS programming is very similar to commercial programming, except a little bit higher brow and without commercials. So do you see this as something that we already get on the internet or something totally different?
Well, I'll give you an example. KQED has been producing Quest, which is a locally produced series on science and education. And they do an actually really comprehensive job of everything you can do on the internet. So they broadcast it, they stick it into iTunes University, they put the curriculum in iTunes University, they podcast it. Anything you can do, they have a blog. On today's internet, they're doing. And this is a project we're trying to implement. If you could take their assets, which are rights cleared, because they did the process of clearing the rights for all distribution on this project, right? Make the uncompressed video footage available over the state's education network into classrooms across the state, right? And then you put a layer of applications around that content so that teachers could segment, archive, and present it in new ways, right? Students could find contextually relevant examples within the media of not just watching the show, but find the specific interview with a specific scientist on bees, right? And then from within that flow, access other archived materials or communities of learners working on bees in the state of California and have exchange environments that are richer HD quality video conferencing and leverage sort of the power of this emergent semantic web to deliver semantically, contextually relevant content. So they're doing a lot of it in silos, but we could really aggregate that and unify that over this network in a way that's very different. And for a teacher, we can produce the production environment for their presentation of that content over the network without them having to have a supercomputer or store anything locally, which is a huge issue for schools. Does that answer your question?
Not really. So again, it seems like it's just a slight upgrading of what's commercially available. I mean, you could go to Google and get some of these things, but not at high definition rates. So is it the presentation that's going to be upgraded, or is there new ideas and applications?
Well, I think we're working on applications that will support sort of a persistent user experience that can bring public broadcasting content into it, but also marry it to other things that are out there. So a lot of universities are starting to open source their big data sets, and that's a lot of what's happening on these networks right now as people are tapping these across the network. So we're building an environment that will allow K-12 to start to access pieces of that in a contextually relevant way over the network. And then in PBS specifically, if you took the NewsHour, right? The NewsHour has 30 years of interviews on topical issues to our society. But it's almost impossible for them to really create a way for schools to access that stuff besides compressed, and they have trouble just even digitizing everything. So creating environments over the network where people can tap into their database without them having to transcode to every conceivable format. They could pick one format that is supported consistently across the network and make their content available to students in their civics classes. And we're partnering with that and another initiative to enhance civics education in this country. And there's a big missing piece in that there's not a lot of video content that's relevant to topical issues on civics in this country. So it's leveraging those assets in a new way. And then for public broadcasting, if you ask the average 20-year-old what is public media, they would say YouTube or MySpace. And that's good. It's true. That's where they are. So how does public broadcasting enter into new ways of interacting with audiences in the country that leverages what works in those spaces without them having to chase after every single technology? So we need to create a dialogue between those emergent platforms and the traditional function of PBS that results in younger people getting interested and connected to the idea, the value of public interest media, which is expanding beyond just the scope of PBS, which owned it for a number of years in the traditional broadcast world. And now everybody's struggling to define that in a networked environment. Okay, good.
We have a question here.
Hi. I listened to a podcast on The Economist a couple weeks ago explaining how the indirect benefits associated with public investment in highways has been about 25% a year. And I was just wondering if a number has been similarly put together for the public investment in the Internet.
Well, I mean, there's been numbers associated with how much commerce happens on the Internet. I haven't seen anything that I really trust, and I think that one of the, Reagan, if everyone remembers Ronald Reagan? He was a big fan of this campus. Reagan increased taxes to sustain the investment that Pat Brown started, Liberal Democrat 101, right, to fund the UC and the CSU and the community college districts, right? And at no point did they ever try to quantify. They did qualify, but they never tried to quantify why they were doing it. They said, there is the California dream, and we need to be the world's best education system. And we had that title until about the early 80s, right? I think there's a real policy trap of trying to put a number value on it, right? I think that we could count up all the money that's exchanged on sites that we can track. But people have avoided doing that because they don't want to get into the taxing of the Internet question. I think the framing is really important, and George Lakoff, who's a Berkeley professor, is really important on the framing issue. It should always be thought about in terms of the value it produced for this country. So the highways as a security highway system, as a commerce system, absolutely, but as the ability of Americans to leave any town in the United States and go anywhere in the United States, that was a radical, radical thing to do. And other countries followed suit. But that wasn't a given. So I think sort of in its broader view, they have now, and this gets argued on the low, this is pork, right? Spend $50 million on a bridge in a county in Illinois, and it's going to produce $200 million of economic benefit in that county. There are those types of formulas, but they haven't produced more investment in the public infrastructure, right? When Reagan came into the White House, what they really did inside of the various social service agencies is start to create return on investment equations and analysis of it. And no, this stuff doesn't make any money. You spend money on this stuff. And other things can happen as a result of it. But I haven't seen anything that really produces a number I would trust around that.
You mentioned both Internet 2 and National Lambda Rail, and there was an effort to merge those two networks, which failed. And there's now some political issues there. They won't peer with each other, and that's causing some problems for those of us here on the university campuses. So I'm kind of wondering, we've got these cracks kind of in the picture here. How does your proposal, how can we unify these two networks under this new umbrella of a National Public Lightpath? And who is the we in the question? When you say, what if we took the PBS infrastructure plus the universities and connect that to local, who's the we? Who's going to exercise the leadership to bring all of this stuff under kind of a unified whole?
Well, I'll start with the we is us. In the biggest we sense. And I think politicians aren't, they're really smart people and they don't have any time to think about anything. So as soon as somebody gets something that sounds good, they can ride that sucker into the sunset, right? And no commentary at all, but look at the idea of change in this election, right? Doesn't that seem obvious? Like, yeah, we need some change. But it is the whole crux. I mean, it's like it's really hard to get the branding right. So I think the leadership will come when people start to connect the dots, but there needs to be a lot of this kind of discussion. And if you go up to Humboldt, which has one internet connection going up to 101, every time there's a storm, it fails. This meeting would have 400 people in it, and they would be community people. It would not be researchers. It would be community people. So there's a way to build consensus around it, and it's a political organizing question as much as anything else. The Internet 2 National Lambda Rail, merger talks and all of that, there's a lot to say, and I won't say it all. But there's a reason why certain people work at the university, right? We like it, right? We get to have coffee, we get to do cool stuff, we get to write grants. You have a certain buffer versus the market, right? So there are many reasons why that merger was on or off or whatever. But in the end, I think that the rest of the nation needs to come to the people doing the hard work around the network science. And they need to recognize the last 12 years that they've put in. And we need to change it from a conversation of scarcity, which it very much is. How do we get this much for $5 more million, right? Or the whole value of both networks is under a couple $100 million, right? Last year in Silicon Valley, $480 million spent on 3D virtual worlds, right? $450 million of it is in the toilet already, right? So a matter of scale, and if we change the scale, I think we can change some of the contentiousness and the politics of it. And what I think Congress should do is, who knows what the E-rate is? Wow. Exactly. It is a federally funded subsidy for libraries and schools to get onto the internet. Republicans and Democrats put $2.5 billion into the E-rate every single year. Right? Why? Because it comes back to your local school. That's how they pay for the internet connection. If you supplemented that by $500 million a year for 5 years, you would spend $2.5 billion, or roughly the equivalent of what gets lost in the Pentagon, or what gets burned in Medicare because it's not efficiently run and there's no electronic media. Just look for that. There's somewhere out there. There's $2.5 billion over 5 years. And spend it, leverage the existing networks, fund those researchers to come in and really establish the architecture at scale, and just change the conversation. I mean, it's like we have two groups. Again, why cannibalize two important initiatives? Let's do something that's a meta level above that, which achieves a larger range of goals. And I think that when you have a situation of scarcity, you're not thinking at your creative best unless you really have scarcity. And my suggestion is that the United States needs to start acting like a third world country, because that's the network we have right now, right? And they stopped waiting around for copper to show up for their phone lines. They went mobile. So we need to kind of leapfrog today's conversation and say, what if we don't do this? I guess I should be closing, so I'll close on this. I would ask the United States, what if we don't build the network we need to sustain ourselves? What if we don't support the activities that young people are doing online, gaming, in social networks? They are building civic engagement right now in spite of us, in spite of the turnoff to politics, in spite of the burnout with television, in spite of the failings of public education and underfunding and everything. They are building communities right now using online environments to do it. If we don't give them the network to pursue that fully, we are undercutting our capacity as a nation. And we need to get on the ball with this. And it's not Republican or Democrat. It's not rural or urban. It is a foundation question of what kind of country we want to have in the next generation.
It was great. We're out of time, obviously. But if you have any questions, Joaquín will be here for a little while. Thank you.